Hi, I'm Dr. Brent Satterley, and I'm here today to walk you through the alphabet soup of queerness. So why are you here? As social work students, one of the primary tenets of social work is social justice. According to the NASW, the primary mission is to enhance well-being and help meet the basic human needs of all people, with particular attention to the needs and empowerment of people who are vulnerable, oppressed, and living in poverty. All that being said, what we know about LGBTQ issues and social work isn't always so great. Providers are often called to attend to LGBTQ issues in practice. In fact, LGBTQ persons may seek counseling at rates up to 5 times greater than non-LGBTQ folks. In fact, we know that many times, unfortunately, LGBTQ clients experience discrimination and subsequent prejudicial attitudes and insufficient service delivery from social workers. And because social workers provide more mental health services than any other mental health profession, in fact, we have to be able to display a greater sense of cultural competence when working with diverse populations, especially those like LGBTQ folks who are often disenfranchised. But here's the rub. This is why you're really here. You're really here to engage with humans, to be able to connect with people that may or may not be different from you in some way, shape, or form, especially around the way they love or who they are, both in terms of sexual orientation and gender identity. As you can see, it's always important to remember different faces, aspects, and ways of being here in this context. It's also pertinent to state that when talking about LGBTQ issues, we have to keep the notion of intersectionality in mind. That is, how multiple forms of diversity can exist for a person or group of people in ongoing fashion. For example, someone who is African American and gay often experiences some of the unique challenges of both prejudice with regard to sexual orientation as well as racism on an ongoing basis. Having said that, that brings us to the alphabet soup of queerness. Here is a little brush of some of the different definitions that some folks use to refer to such issues as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and asexual. This is not all of the definitions. However, it's important to recognize that it is not just one or two, as we will see as we continue on in this training. Right, so what is sexual orientation? To understand that, I'm going to explore 3 different constructs, O, B, and I. So, I want you to remember when thinking about the construct O, which we'll talk about in a second, and I want you to first close your eyes and remember your first crush. I want you to think back on who your first crush was, how you felt on the inside when you saw them. It could be when you were in middle school, in high school, in college, anything of that nature. What it felt like on the inside, the ooshy-gooshy feelings that you may have had. That is basically your sexual orientation. It's who you're attracted to and who you fall in love with. That's all it is. Lots of different ways that we understand it has changed over time, but at the end of the day, it's who you're attracted to and who you fall in love with. B stands for behavior. That's what you do, wherever, with whomever, whether it be on the back of a jalopy, on the kitchen table, or in your bedroom. Any kind of behavior that is sexual behavior would count in this context. If O is orientation and who you fall in love with and who you're attracted to, behavior is what you do. And finally, identity. Sexual orientation identity refers to what you call yourself. And that, of course, falls currently within the English language as we see it here with regard to lesbian, gay, straight, bisexual, queer, asexual, pansexual. Some of these terms you may have heard, some you may have not. We'll explore some of these to some extent, but if you want to know more about those kinds of things, do your research. All right, so in order to understand sexual orientation, we have to do at least a little bit of an historical analysis and go back to Kinsey. Alfred Kinsey published Sexual Behavior in the Human Male and Sexual Behavior in the Human Female in 1948 and 52, respectively, and found that 10% of adolescent males and 6 to 8% of adolescent females engaged in same-sex sexual behavior to the point of orgasm. Now, which of the 3 constructs does this address? Orientation, behavior, or identity? Well, of course, it addresses behavior. And as we know, that is often one of the basic premises by which the infamous 10% of the American population is gay comes from. That is both flawed and inaccurate with regard to representing the current U.S. Census of looking at LGBT populations. In order to be able to understand that, we have to also know a little bit more about what Kinsey created. Kinsey created the Kinsey scale. It's a 7-point scale ranging from 0 to 6, 0 being exclusively heterosexual, 6 being exclusively homosexual, to be able to highlight different aspects of sexual behavior that people encountered. As you can see, from 1 through 5 are varying degrees of bisexual behavior that people would be able to then track and frame in the context of their work. Are they a Kinsey 0 that has only ever had sexual behavior with someone of the opposite sex, or 6, or they only had sexual behavior with someone of the same sex? And that frames it in this context. Having said that, there are lots of different ways that people identify in their terms of orientations. As you can see here, the asexual orientation, typically, as you can see, it frames as both romantic and or sexual attractions or falling in love with other people. Someone may be attracted to someone or they may fall in love with them. Asexual refers to doesn't experience any kind of sexual or nor romantic attraction towards anyone. Gray sexual is someone who rarely experiences a romantic or sexual attraction to anyone. Demisexual experiences romantic or sexual attraction towards someone only after developing a very strong bond, etc., etc. And then you have hetero, homo, bi. Pansexual experiences romantic or sexual attraction towards all genders, regardless of the gender. And polysexual, romantic or sexual experiences and or attractions towards multiple, but not necessarily all genders. As you can see, there's lots of different terminologies that are used here. This is just scratching the surface. Some people have questioned whether or not such terms as gray sexual or demisexual or pansexual or polysexual are actual sexual orientations. In the context of social work practice, it is important to know how people identify themselves. But generally speaking, it is always wise to be able to go based upon what it is the client says that they identify as. But it's important to note the differences between and among orientations here. All right, so how people come to identify themselves with regard to LGB identities. There are lots of different stage models out there as it relates to how people come to get to know themselves. Identity Cass, for example, first frame the identity confusion, identity comparison, identity tolerance, identity acceptance, identity pride, and identity synthesis. In the context of understanding it. I often think of it as identity confusion. Am I gay? Identity comparison. Well, they're gay. That's what gay looks like. I don't know. Am I gay? Identity tolerance. Yeah, I guess I'm gay. I'm not so happy about it. Identity acceptance. I'm gay. Identity pride, boy am I gay, and identity synthesis, I'm gay, yeah, it's just a part of me. Now you can see the differences in ways that people shift and change over a lifetime. Of course, all of this is couched on both cultural and value-based experiences and perspectives in their context. This is, however, a stage theory and often thought of linear in its presentation. Michelle Eliason identified the inclusive model of lesbian identity assumption and included 4 cycles of identity assumption: pre-identity, emerging identity, experience and recognition of oppression, and reevaluation and evolution of identities. And she predicated upon this particular cyclical model by looking at aspects of dominant discourse and how they related to counter discourse. Dominant discourse, basically, if you replace the term discourse with culture, you get the idea. That is, what does our dominant culture say a person is or should be, and what are some of the countercultural messages about all other and or alternative ways of being in our society or culture. And the experience of how people understand this within the context of relationships was particularly important for Michelle Eliason's theory of lesbian identity assumption. Satterley and Dyson developed the cyclical model of identity assumption predicated upon Michelle Eliason's work, and looked at the whole notion of internalized recognition of not fitting in, incorporating social identity theories, social solidarity, or a desire to fit in. They frame the notion of initial acculturation, goodness of fit, recognition of alternatives, reacculturation, and identity selection. You can see it here by taking a look at the initial experience of the overarching norms of the culture in which one lives or grew up. The experience of a bad fit, I don't fit in to what everybody says I'm supposed to be. The identifying, exploring other ways to fit in, exploring different communities, different relationships, different cultural aspects, selection of a new identity that represents a better fit. That is, this is how I fit in, this is where I fit in, and acculturation to the new norms of identity group. This is part of who I am. And then there can be an ongoing internal assessment based on that. For example, if someone comes out as gay, they feel like they don't fit in as a straight person in the world, and they explore being gay, and they say, yes, I'm gay, that's who I am, and yet they find that they don't necessarily fit in with all aspects of what is considered a dominant discourse or dominant culture of the gay community. Maybe they identify as something known as a bear, that is someone who feels much more comfortable with their own body type, and that can incorporate cultural aspects of a larger guy, might be a little hairy, so different cultural identity markers in that respect. That brings us to gender. So what is gender? Understanding the distinction between orientation and gender is critical, but let's do some gender clarifications first. Biological sex is a combination of chromosomes, gonads, and hormones. Gender identity, however, is internal and in psychological sense of who they are as a gendered person, so that who that person feels like on the inside, and gender expression is how they then communicate that to others, either in presentation of self, pronoun use, etc., etc. Great example of how to differentiate and understand some of the aspects of sexual orientation and gender in this context is the gender unicorn. Looking at gender identity, that is how someone feels like they are on the inside as a gendered person. Gender expression, how they present themselves to other people. Their biological sex or sex assigned at birth. Who they're physically attracted to and emotionally attracted to, of course, has to do with sexual orientation. Some important terminology pieces to note. Transgender refers to an adjective used to describe a person whose gender identity is incongruent with the biological sex they were assigned at birth. That is, someone who feels like if their biological sex was male and on the inside their gender identity experience is female, they might then identify as transgender. Someone who is cisgender, however, is an adjective used to describe a person whose gender identity is congruent with the biological sex they were assigned at birth. In other words, they feel like their biological sex, their body, their chromosomes all match their gender identity and how they feel like on the inside in the context of how the sex that they were assigned at birth. And gender identities abound. There's lots of different ways that people identify. These are just a few, and it's important to be able to understand. But at the end of the day, one of the most important pieces that in the context of self-determination is to always ask how a person would identify in terms of the pronouns they want to use and what they would call themselves. Stay tuned for section 2.